Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something a little different.
Yeah.
Instead of the usual, science or history deep dives, you and I are going to explore the power of our words.
Okay, interesting. Where are we drawing from?
Our source for this is some, well, really fascinating insights from a Buddhist scripture. Specifically, a section about moving away from what it calls akko, which translates roughly to harsh speech.
Right. Akko.
Now, I know religious texts might not be everyone's typical source, but think of this more as a really practical guide.
How so?
Well, to clearer communication, maybe, and building stronger relationships, something I think is always valuable, especially when life gets busy.
That's right. We've been looking into excerpts from the Kinfitstutap Tedninkap. It outlines 10 wholesome actions.
Uh-huh.
And this part about, well, leaving behind harsh speech really stood out. It's quite profound.
So our mission today.
Our goal, I think, for this deep dive is to explore the 8 positive qualities of speech that this text says we can unlock when we, let go of that harsh language.
Okay.
We want to understand what this ancient wisdom reveals about how our words truly affect us and those around us, too.
Exactly. And harsh speech, it might sound obvious, right? Don't be mean.
Yeah, seems straightforward.
But as we dug into the source, we found some, well, surprising angles and some really useful ideas, stuff that can give you a fresh way to think about your everyday conversations.
Whether that's at work or just...
Yeah, leading a team meeting or just chatting with family or friends. Okay, let's dive in. The first one. Loinoi không vượt quá, which means something like words that aren't excessive.
That's the basic idea, yeah. But what's really interesting is that excessive here isn't just about, like, the number of words you use.
What else, then?
It's also about how clear and focused our words are. The text actually draws a pretty clear line between negative emotions.
Like anger.
Yeah, anger, frustration, even just feeling agitated or flustered. And our tendency then to speak without clear boundaries. Going off on tangents, losing the main point.
Yeah, that rings true. When you're really worked up about something, it feels like you just can't stop talking, right?
Exactly.
And you're not always thinking, am I making sense here?
Precisely. And the source points to the vital role of tritut, which we can translate here as wisdom, or maybe a kind of insightful understanding.
Okay.
And speaking appropriately. It's about being aware of what the listener actually needs, respecting their time, their attention, and really aiming for communication that's both clear and, concise.
Right.
The key insight seems to be that effective communication prioritizes that clarity and the listener's needs over just like emotional venting or trying to sound important.
So it's not just about being brief for brevity's sake, but about being really thoughtful, considering how your words are actually going to land with the other person.
Exactly. The text also links this idea of losing measure, modo, it calls it, to deeper things like self-aggrandizement, wungamun, and attachment, tamahai.
Self-aggrandizement and attachment. Can you unpack that a bit?
Well, it suggests that when we're driven by wanting to look good, or we're really attached to our own viewpoint,
Yeah.
our words can easily become all about us and just completely miss the mark with the listener. We're not really connecting.
That makes a lot of sense. If you're trying too hard to impress someone or you're just rigidly stuck on your own opinion, you're probably not focused on having a clear two-way conversation.
Right. The text gives a very relatable example. Like, maybe you only need a few words to explain something clearly, but instead you talk and talk, maybe without real clarity, just because you're caught up in your emotions. You feel this urge to just get it all out, or maybe to dominate the discussion somehow.
Oh, I've definitely been there. And I'm sure you have too. You walk away thinking, wait, what did we actually even say? What got communicated? And that actually brings up a good point for you listening right now. Can you think of times when you let negative emotions, maybe annoyance, or even just excitement lead you to speak, well, more than you needed to, or maybe in a way that wasn't super clear? What was the result?
It's a good reflection point. Okay, so let's move to the second purifying karma. Lu noi no mang lai lo ich, which means words bring benefit. What's the core idea here?
This seems pretty crucial. Words should help, not harm.
Yeah, the source is quite direct about it. It says that harsh speech, precisely because it often bubbles up from negative emotions like anger,
Right.
inherently aims, maybe subconsciously, to harm rather than help the listener. When we speak from that place, we're really not considering the other person's well-being at all.
It's like the whole goalpost shift.
How
The
so?
point of the conversation flips from, connecting or solving something to just creating conflict or maybe hurting the other person.
Precisely. And the text emphasizes how just sort of stubbornly holding on to your own viewpoint without really considering others can lead to really damaging communication.
Yeah.
Even with the people you care about most, your partner, your kids.
That's definitely something many of us can relate to, unfortunately. How often do arguments with loved ones just spiral downwards because everyone is so attached to their perspective, their needs?
The text actually gives a pretty common scenario, like disagreements with a spouse about something simple, maybe how to spend free time.
Okay.
One person wants to relax this way, the other has a different idea. And because they're both maybe so fixed on their own preference, their own benefit,
Yeah.
the conversation can easily become harsh, accusatory, and ultimately just creates distance between them.
It's those small, unresolved conflicts, those little paper cuts from words that can really add up over time and put a strain on a relationship.
Exactly. And this is where the text brings in a really interesting concept. Fields of merit. Rungfuk, especially in the context of family.
Fields of merit.
Yeah.
Like farming good karma. Sort of, yeah. The idea is that our family relationships are like fertile ground. We can cultivate positive karma through our actions within them, and that absolutely includes our speech.
Okay.
But by using harmful, harsh words, we're essentially, damaging that ground. We're planting negative seeds that the text suggests will have long-term consequences.
Wow. So those sharp words aren't just vanishing into thin air. They're actually shaping the future dynamic of those connections.
That's the perspective being offered here, yes. And it kind of prompts us to think, how often do our disagreements, even when we maybe think we have good intentions, really boil down to us prioritizing what we see as beneficial for ourselves, rather than genuinely trying to understand and act in the best interest of the other person? It's a subtle but really crucial distinction to consider.
Definitely food for thought. Okay, the third quality, Lunoi Nutten Huffley, words are reasonable. Now this feels tricky because, as you said, what one person thinks is reasonable can be totally unreasonable to someone else.
Exactly.
And this is where the text makes a really insightful point.
What's that?
It basically shifts the focus away from your own idea of reasonable and onto the listener's perspective.
Yeah.
It says quite clearly, Banoi vui ai di no latia chua. Essentially, whoever you're speaking to, they are the standard for reasonableness in that interaction.
Whoa, okay. So what makes perfect logical sense to me, it might be completely baffling or irrelevant to you.
Right.
And in that conversation, it's your understanding of what's reasonable that actually matters for effective communication.
That's the gist, yes. The text warns against just trying to impose your own logic, your own expectations onto others. It says that will inevitably lead to disharmony, to friction. It's more about recognizing that different people operate with different assumptions, different values, different logics, you might say. And we need to try and understand those if we want to communicate effectively.
It's about meeting people where they are, cognitively speaking, rather than just expecting them to instantly jump over to your way of seeing things.
Precisely. The text uses an interesting example here. It references a traditional saying about women, Goomti konkin sa tiowan, which translates to something like, when close, they don't show respect. When distant, they resent.
Okay. That sounds a bit dated.
It does, and it's crucial to understand the text presents this as a perceived tendency within a specific cultural context, not some universal truth about all women.
Got it. So what's the point it's making?
The point isn't about the content of the saying itself, but about the principle of needing to understand another person's inherent tendencies or perspectives, their logic, even if you don't fully agree with it or understand it yourself.
Ah, I see. So it's about acknowledging that someone might react in a certain pattern based on their own background or personality.
Exactly.
And then adjusting how you communicate to be more effective within their framework.
Exactly. It's not about excusing bad behavior, but about understanding the operating system, so to speak, of the person you're talking to, so you can communicate in a way that actually resonates and is perceived as reasonable by them.
Okay.
And the text then prompts you, the listener, to think about times when your own sense of logic maybe clashed with someone else's, a colleague, a family member.
Yeah.
And how could you maybe bridge that gap by genuinely trying to see things from their perspective, understanding they're reasonable?
That's a really valuable reminder to, step outside our own heads sometimes when we're trying to connect. Okay, let's move to number 4. Lo noi mudiyu, Words are beautiful. This sounds a bit more aesthetic.
That's part of it, sure. The text contrasts harsh speech, describing it quite vividly as thothan hoi ham, which means coarse and foul-smelling, with language that is refined, pleasant, agreeable, but it goes deeper than just, avoiding swear words.
Gross.
It emphasizes that using crude or offensive language doesn't actually elevate you. In fact, it does the opposite. It kind of diminishes you in the eyes of others. The core insight here is really that beautiful, considered speech enhances your image and fosters positive perceptions.
So it's about the overall impression you create, the image you project through your words.
Precisely. And the text specifically calls out the impact on children. It says that a parent who constantly uses harsh, ugly language risks creating fear and maybe even resentment in their children.
Yeah.
And that a child's early perceptions of their parents, shaped by things like this, can have a really lasting impact. Ideally, the text suggests every time a child thinks of their parent should evoke feelings of respect, happiness, maybe safety.
Not fear or disgust because of the language used.
Exactly. That's a really powerful point. As a parent, or really anyone in a guiding or influential role, the last thing you want is for your words to actively create fear or aversion in someone you care about.
Definitely not.
So the text asks you, our listener, to really think. What kind of image are you projecting through your words? What are the long-term effects on your closest relationships? Are your words building connection and respect, or are they maybe creating distance and negative associations?
A sobering thought indeed. Okay, let's look at the fifth purifying karma. Loi, noi, dupchamchen. Words are easily accepted. What's the key dynamic here?
Well, here the text focuses specifically on the habit of constantly denying or contradicting others. That knee-jerk, no, or actually.
The contrarian impulse.
Exactly. It explains that often the motivation behind this constant opposition isn't necessarily about truth, but more about a desire to, elevate oneself, to seem smarter, more knowledgeable, maybe just to win the point.
Right. But does it work?
Usually the opposite, according to the text. It damages relationships. The core insight seems to be that speech that is readily accepted involves a willingness to first understand, maybe find points of agreement, rather than just constantly needing to oppose or correct.
It's like you're always playing defense or maybe offense, trying to be right, even if it means making the other person feel wrong or small or just dismiss.
Exactly. The text uses a pretty stark example. Arguing repeatedly with good friends over minor things until eventually they become enemies.
Wow.
It also connects this to interactions within the family, with children, with a spouse, where always saying no, always disagreeing, doesn't actually earn respect. Instead, it tends to push people away. They stop bringing things to you.
I can definitely see that happening. Nobody enjoys feeling like their ideas or feelings are constantly being shot down or invalidated.
And the text includes a really sharp analogy here.
Okay.
Stumbling over the same stone again and again.
Meaning?
It highlights how we often fail to learn from these negative communication patterns. If you keep habitually disagreeing, keep creating conflict in the same way, you're essentially just repeating the same mistake, tripping over the same stone, and expecting a different result.
It's about recognizing and breaking those ingrained habits of always needing to have the last word or always finding the flaw or offering the contrary opinion just for the sake of it.
Precisely. And it encourages you, the listener, to maybe examine your own patterns here. Are you someone who instinctively looks for points of contention? Or do you naturally try to find common ground first, to understand before you critique?
That's a tough question, perhaps, but a really important one to consider, honestly. Okay, moving to the sixth quality. Lu noi duk tin ke, words are trustworthy. How does harsh speech mess with trust?
This is a really important one. Here, the text specifically calls out the use of threats as a form of harsh speech that deeply erodes trust.
Threats, like, if you don't do this, then.
Exactly, and it shares a quite personal story, the teacher recounting how their mother used to threaten them with the police as a child.
Oh, wow.
And how that created this lasting fear, this knot of anxiety that actually stayed with them even into adulthood. It wasn't just forgotten.
That's a really vivid example of the long-term damage our words can inflict, isn't it? Especially on kids or anyone vulnerable.
It truly is. The text emphasizes the unseen, perhaps, but very real harm caused by tactics like that. They create lasting anxiety and fundamentally undermine the feeling of safety and security within a relationship.
It's like the implicit message behind a threat is, well, that your word isn't enough on its own, or that the relationship relies on fear, not respect.
Precisely. You're sending the message that compliance has to be enforced by a negative consequence. It shifts the whole foundation of the relationship away from trust and mutual respect towards fear and coercion.
Yeah, that's not a healthy foundation.
Not at all. And the text asks you to consider, in your own relationships, do your words tend to build trust and security?
Huh.
Or do they, maybe unintentionally sometimes, create fear and uncertainty through threats, even veiled ones?
A really crucial distinction to be aware of. Okay, seventh quality. Lui noi hong bit che bai. Words are not criticized or ridiculed. How does harsh speech invite that kind of reaction?
Well, the text suggests that harsh, ill-considered speech often leads to the speaker being ridiculed or mocked, maybe behind their back, maybe even to their face eventually.
Yeah. How so?
It gives a specific example. Someone who constantly threatens divorce, maybe as a manipulation tactic in arguments with their partner.
Okay.
Eventually, those threats might just lose all their power. They might even become a source of, well, amusement or scorn for the other person. Like, oh, here we go again. The threat becomes hollow.
I see. It's like the boy who cried wolf effect. The power of the harsh words fades, and it just ends up making the speaker look ineffective or maybe desperate or even foolish.
Precisely that. The text emphasizes that becoming the target of that kind of mockery or dismissal is often, well, self-inflicted. When your words are consistently driven by negativity, by anger, by a lack of thoughtful consideration for the situation or the listener,
Yeah.
they can easily come across as unreasonable, disproportionate, or even just plain absurd. And people react accordingly.
So it's about maintaining a certain level of maybe dignity and thoughtfulness in how you communicate to avoid those kinds of negative judgments.
Exactly. You want your words to land with weight, with reason. And the text encourages you, our listener, to think about times maybe when your own words might have been perceived as, well, foolish or laughable. And to consider if those instances were perhaps linked to speaking harshly or just without careful thought in the heat of the moment.
It's a good reminder to maybe check our ego at the door before we speak sometimes. Okay, finally, the eighth, purifying karma, lo noi hyun mathish. Words make everyone like you. Or maybe words are beloved. This sounds like the ultimate positive outcome.
In a sense, it is the culmination, yeah. The text connects the ugliness sues is the word used of harsh speech.
And that's not just the words.
No, it encompasses the whole package. The words themselves, but also your tone of voice, your facial expressions, your body language, your overall demeanor when you're being harsh.
Got it. The whole vibe.
Exactly. It connects that whole ugly package to damaging your image, fundamentally, in the minds of others. The core insight here is that consistently kind, reasonable, and beneficial speech cultivates positive regard and deepens your connections.
So it's the overall pattern of negative communication that creates this lasting negative impression.
Precisely. And the text points out something quite insightful. This negative image can be very sticky, very hard to erase, much like how we, as humans, tend to remember negative traits or experiences with others more vividly than the positive ones sometimes.
That's true. Negativity bias.
Right. So the source emphasizes that the primary harm of habitual harsh speech is often, ultimately, to oneself. It lowers your standing, the respect others feel for you, the warmth in your relationships.
It's like you're actively building your own negative reputation through the way you choose to speak over time.
We've got it. And it contrasts this sharply with the positive impact of consistently kind, reasonable, beneficial speech. That kind of communication naturally leads to being cherished, respected, and liked by those around you. It even touches briefly on the reciprocal nature of this. When you consistently use wholesome speech, you become a source of support, maybe even pride, for your loved ones, which strengthens those bonds further.
It creates a positive feedback loop. Good communication leads to good relationships, which makes good communication easier.
Exactly. A virtuous cycle rather than a vicious one. Now, having explored all these 8 sort of positive outcomes of avoiding harsh speech, the text then digs a bit deeper. It asks, what's the fundamental cause of harsh speech in the first place?
Right. What's the root? And it points squarely at negative emotions, doesn't it? Like things like anger, resentment, dissatisfaction, agitation. These are the real drivers behind the harsh words.
That's right. And this is a really crucial point, I think. The text emphasizes that if we genuinely want to change our speech patterns, To really embody these positive qualities, we need to address these underlying emotions. We can't just focus on suppressing the symptoms, try not to say the mean thing.
So it's not just about gritting your teeth and forcing out polite words while you're still absolutely fuming inside. That doesn't really count.
Well, it might be a start, but it's not the deep change the text is pointing towards.
Yeah.
It uses a powerful analogy here. When you're angry or upset, you tend to focus only on the waste of others, their flaws, their mistakes, what they did wrong.
You filter out the good stuff.
Exactly. You ignore their positive qualities. The text highlights that overcoming these negative emotions isn't just about sheer willpower or control. It's about a more fundamental shift in perspective. It's about what you allow to really permeate your being, your mind, the process of saturation or influence.
Wow. So it's about actively cultivating a more positive inner landscape, a different way of seeing.
Yes.
So that kindness and reason naturally flow out into how we communicate with the world rather than harshness.
Precisely. It's about consciously establishing more positive perspectives, allowing wholesome influences and ways of thinking to take root in our minds over time.
Yeah.
It's a practice.
Okay. And finally, the text does touch on a longer term, maybe even spiritual dimension to all this, doesn't it? What does it suggest there?
It brings it back to that idea we mentioned near the start. It suggests that directing the merit, the positive energy generated by consciously abstaining from harsh speech, directing that towards the highest goal, towards enlightenment, Vothung Buddha, is said to contribute towards attaining the pure vocal qualities of a Buddha in some future existence. It even connects this pure speech, to the effortless power of things like mantras, where sound itself has a profound effect.
So it's a reminder that, from this perspective at least, our words carry a really profound significance, one that extends way beyond just our immediate interactions.
Absolutely. They shape our character, our relationships, our present moment, and according to this view, even our potential for future growth and transformation. The text really concludes by underscoring the huge impact of our words, both right here, right now, and in the longer arc of our lives.
So, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, the central message feels really clear, actually. Consciously choosing to move away from harsh speech. It's not just about, being nice.
No, it's much more than that.
It's presented here as a really impactful practice, something with tangible benefits for how we connect, the quality of our relationships, maybe even our own inner calm and clarity, all beautifully laid out in these ancient insights.
Absolutely. And I think these 8 qualities offer a really practical, almost diagnostic framework. We can use them to examine our own communication habits.
Yeah,
to identify specific areas where maybe we could refine how we express ourselves, aiming for communication that's more beneficial, more reasonable, more trustworthy, and so on.
Okay, so for you, our listener, here's maybe a final thought to carry with you from this discussion. Think about one specific conversation you had recently. Could be anything: work, home, friends. Now, try looking at it through the lens of these 8 qualities we just discussed. Was it excessive? Was it beneficial? Was it reasonable to the other person? Was it easily accepted? Ask yourself, what could have been different if you'd consciously approached that interaction with these principles in mind? And maybe even speculate. What might the longer-term effects of that difference be, even from just that one conversation?
It's a powerful exercise.
It is. We really encourage you to just observe your own speech patterns this week. Maybe notice the effects they seem to have on others and on yourself.
And as this source material suggests, this deep dive into harsh speech is really just scratching the surface of one aspect of a broader path, those 10 wholesome actions. Perhaps looking further into those other principles might offer even more valuable insights for living a more, harmonious and effective life. Lots to think about.
Definitely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.